This is Do It For a Living, your source for inside information on the future of automotive performance.
You're never coming at it from the perspective of, I wonder if this is a safe thing for me to do for the guy that's sitting in that car. But I can tell you this, as soon as that car starts to crash, the fucking only thing on your mind is, man, there's a human being sitting in that thing. And not only is it a human being, it's my buddy. And, watching that car go over the fence, a week and a half ago in Bahrain, there was a period of time, and I don't really know what that period of time was. It seemed like a long time. It might have only been 5 minutes, but I couldn't move.
What's holding you back from starting or growing your business into what it can be? Well, if you're listening to this, it's not a lack of information. What you're about to hear is all you need to get motivated and start making waves. Do It For a Living podcast details the journey of today's true players in their own words. Find out how they broke out so you can too. The time is now. The time is always now. So I have a very special guest today. Shane Tecklenburg is in the house, ready to blow your mind. And if you're unfamiliar with Shane, first crawl out from under the rock. Shane's a world-class drag racing tuner, and he's now responsible for tuning the world's first 5-second import. Shane, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Reed. Appreciate it, and appreciate what you're trying to do for the industry. It's a remarkable thing, and I wish you good luck with it.
Much appreciated, my friend. Can you tell us about yourself and your business? How did you get started with Shane T Consulting, and what's your background?
My background is that my dad was an auto shop teacher, and so I was sort of predestined to have something to do with cars. When I was a kid, he was building a 32 Roadster out in the garage, and I used to go out there and mix all his tools up in his toolbox, take all of his files and try and file his bench in half. But eventually, he'd be able to ask me to go get him a 5/8, and I'd go get him a 5/8. So I had that automatic desire to want to have something to do with cars and mechanical things. And as I got older, having your dad as an auto shop teacher and being interested in cars is like the best thing in the world, because every single question you ever come up with and want to think about, you can always ask, and he's always got the answer. So it was kind of quite an accelerated learning curve, even though it took me, probably the better part of 10 or 15 years before I really had understanding of what an engine did. But I had this stupid idea when I was about 14 to build this little dragster. This is a few years before junior dragsters existed, but I wanted to build basically a junior dragster, and I had a go-kart with a 2-horse Briggs & Stratton engine in it, and I realized pretty quickly that it wasn't going to be fast enough. So I got to looking around in the shop. My dad had a company that did automotive technical support for repair shops over the telephone, and part of the thing that used to happen with that is that as new equipment and controls would come out on newer cars, they would ask some of the guys that they were working with over the telephone, hey, send us that ignition module so we can check it out over here and see how it works. Hey, send us that fuel injector so we can see what's going on with this new injector technology. So there was a pile of parts laying next door to his business that I used to dig through when I was a kid and look at stuff and think like, wow, that's cool. I wonder how I can put that on my Briggs & Stratton. So one day I looked at this smog pump, and I could see how it worked, and I thought, man, that would make like a bitchin' little supercharger for my go-kart. So I figured out how to weld up some brackets and got it hooked to the belt drive on the Briggs. And I was trying to use the stock Briggs & Stratton carburetor is hooked to the fuel tank, and it's got basically an idle circuit and a not idle circuit, and it's got one adjustment screw. And, it's meant to run constant RPM 3,000 or whatever is mowing your lawn. So, of course, I'd ripped the governor off, and I was dicking around with this thing trying to make it work with a supercharger. And the problem that I was having was it would puddle the fuel up in the supercharger, and when you snap the throttle open, it would throw a load of fuel at the engine, and it would be too rich and didn't want to run. And, I struggled with it. And eventually one of the guys that worked for my dad had an electronics background, and he came next door and kind of took me under his wing and thought it was cool what I was doing, and he told me, listen, you could fix all of those problems with electronic fuel injection. So I'm like, okay, cool. What's electronic fuel injection? So he dug through the pile of parts and came up with an injector and said, look, this is an injector. Fuel comes in here and it goes out there, and it gets an electrical signal to turn it on and spray fuel out of it. So you figure out how to get that end pointed in the intake manifold of your engine and figure out how to get fuel to the other side of it. Here's a fuel pump and here's a fuel pressure regulator. I'll come by after work and I'll show you how we could design a little electronic circuit that'll trigger off of the points and fire this injector. Yeah, right. So about 3 years later, we're building our own circuit boards in the garage to build this, what we would say, electric fuel injector using a 555 timer and a couple of potentiometers and a throttle position switch to basically control the pulse width at an idle and the pulse width not at an idle. By now, I've completely given up on the concept of putting this engine in my dragster because I realize I'll never get my dragster to run. So put a dirt bike motor in the dragster. But we're still developing this little electric fuel injection, and I'm probably 15 or 16 by now. Yeah, and we made it work, man, and the supercharger worked killer, and we started running the thing on methanol and then nitro-methane, and I'm here to tell you, a 2-horse Briggs & Stratton with 100% nitro in it, 30 pounds of boost, sounds like a big block Chevy. I mean, we would run it in the afternoon, just playing around with it, and the people on both sides of the shops would come out and go, what do you guys have in here? What's running in here? It's shaking the floor of my business next door. The shit's falling off the shelves. So anyway, that was pretty cool. But that gave me the introduction to electronic fuel injection and how it worked. And it was, I was totally excited about it. I could see how the EFI worked because we worked through the circuits in the little controller to be able to control the engine. And that
when you say we, that was you and your dad, or you and this other guy?
It was me and a guy named Jeff Ellis. And so me and Jeff, my dad thought it was cool, but he was too smart to want to spend that ridiculous amount of time dicking around with that stuff to try and make it work. But I was 16 and I was dumb, and Jeff was probably 25 and he was clearly dumb. So we would work on the thing, after hours and on weekends and whatever. But once it actually worked, my dad was totally on board with it, and then it was the three of us, the three musketeers, playing around with this stupid thing on a Briggs & Stratton engine just because it was so cool. It didn't even do anything. I mean, I built a stand to hold it on the bench because it was obvious it was never going to work in a car. And so we had this nightmarish contraption. The only regret that I have is we don't have a lot of pictures of it. There's a couple floating around, but it was some pretty cool shit we were doing back in the day. But the point is that let me really understand how fuel injection worked. And to be honest, I mean, I knew how fuel injection worked before I really understood how a carburetor worked.
And that's something that a lot of people can't say.
Yeah, sort of.
That's backwards.
I mean, I had a really good, ridiculously good resource with my dad being an auto shop teacher, and clearly he knew how carburetors worked, and he knew how fuel injection worked. But you don't ever really learn something, or at least I don't, without putting your hands on it and monkeying around with it. And man, I had that before I was out of high school, and then unfortunately I didn't have the vision and the drive to run away in the opposite direction as fast as I could and go try to do some kind of real job that would actually make money. Instead, I decided to keep dicking around with cars.
So from that little dragster that was dirt bike and methanol powered back when you were 16 to where you are now, kind of how do you make that journey?
So the next thing I did was, after school I started going to college. My dad had this deal going where he was working with he's working with a company that was taking ex-aerospace employees and giving them the opportunity to retrain themselves and they were laid off aerospace employees. It was given the opportunity to become automotive technicians. So taking literally rocket scientists and training them how to work on electronic fuel injection on streetcars. So he was partnering with a company that was doing this, and he one day said to me, hey, if you want to think about doing anything with cars, this would be a really great opportunity, and I could get you involved with it if you want. And I'm like, nah, maybe I don't really know if I want to do anything with cars, and I'm just going to keep going to college. I don't know what I want to do. He's like, yeah, okay, no problem. So that was probably Tuesday. Then on Thursday, he comes to me and he goes, all right, look, you're quitting college tomorrow, and you're going to this school thing. So I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. So I mean, man, the first day that I was in there, it was like, I've never been to any kind of class that I loved like that. I couldn't wait to get there in the morning, and I hated when it was over in the afternoon. I was a sponge because we were going over fundamental things that turned on the light bulb for things that I had seen or talked about. I didn't have the whole picture, but when I went through that class, I got the whole picture. And by the way, in a class, being 19 years old, in a class full of 40 and 50-year-old rocket scientists,
pretty intimidating.
It's intimidating, but even if you're not very smart, which I wasn't, there's so much brain power in that room, you can't help but get smart just by osmosis. So it was really an awesome experience. And at the end of that, they basically placed you in a shop to go work on streetcars. So that's what I did for 2 years. And then my dad's company did the same exact thing again this time for Nissan. Nissan North America hired him to do some more training with another group of rocket scientists to put them in Nissan dealerships. And the guy that had taught the class asked if I wanted to come back and go through the class again as an assistant to him. So basically they were now going to pay me to go back through that same class again. So I went like, yeah, I definitely want to do that. So I went through that, went to a Nissan dealership for about, I don't know, month and a half, and thought it sucked. And my dad basically said, look, I think you know enough now that I could hire you to work for my company on the telephone and do diagnostics over the phone if you're interested in trying it. And I was, and so I did. And so I worked for his company from 94. He sold it to Snap-on in 96. They paid him to run it till 99. And I worked for Snap-on until 2001 when I finally said, you know what, the company went from a company that was my dad's company that was dynamic and it was quick, and if you needed something, you went in there, and whether you got the answer you wanted or not, you got the answer. When corporate America took over, it was, we got to have a meeting to figure out which fucking light bulb we're going to replace this week. And I couldn't deal with it. And
things weren't happening.
So by September of 2001, I just flat had it. And I had it with them, and they had it with me, and I was fucking out of there. And then I was going to go back and work on regular streetcars, and it was my dad, once again, who stepped in and said, look, if you go work on regular streetcars, that's all you'll ever do. So, you have some time here. You don't have to have a job right away. You've got a little bit of money. Go fucking try and do something you always wanted to do. I guess I need to take a step back here because this little Briggs & Stratton supercharged engine thing eventually worked its way into the motorcycle engine in my dragster, and we ended up putting the electronic fuel injection on my dragster engine, which was a CR500 two-stroke. Started out with a carburetor and then pretty quickly switched it to the fuel injection unit we had built, and then ran it on methanol in this dragster, and we ran in the low 12s with this dragster and that engine combination. And when we switched from the Briggs & Stratton to the 500cc two-stroke, we ran out of injector because we were using who knows whatever stupid 19-pound-an-hour crappy injector off of whatever streetcar we were trying to run on that Briggs & Stratton, which was fine because it was a little dinky engine. But the CR500 needed a lot more fuel volume, and we couldn't get there with that injector. There was a guy that was driving around the business park where my dad's company was in Huntington Beach in the mid-'80s selling tooling and equipment to test CIS, mostly, fuel injection systems, and things like that. All those systems had a lot of different metric fittings. They were used on all the Mercedes, BMW, all the European cars, and no one had the parts to be able to test them. They didn't know how to test them. They didn't have the right fuel pressure sensor. They didn't have the right adapters. And this guy had a company called JGM Automotive Tooling, and he sold test equipment to be able to technicians, and he was selling it out of the back of his Volkswagen van. And one day he came by my dad's shop and met everybody, and sort of, they talked about all these sorts of things they had in common, and then off he went. Well, JGM Automotive Tooling in about the early 90s or mid-90s became the North American distributor for Motec Systems.
Ah.
So my dad had that connection still because they were in the same business park. They're about, half a mile away from my dad's shop. When we needed a bigger injector for my little dragster engine, me and my dad got in the car and went over to Motec, and I talked to George Clark at Motec and told him what we were doing. and he hooked us up with a Rochester 100-pound-an-hour injector, which was like the biggest thing in captivity at that time. And so we took it back and bolted it on the dragster, and George came down. We used to run the thing down the street on the weekends. So George came down and watched us make a few laps in it on the street, thought it was cool as hell, and that's how I knew where Motec was. So when I quit my job in 2001, was looking for something to do, I had another friend that worked at Motec, Joe Hullett, and Joe did all the like data acquisition stuff. And he, you know, I'd see him from time to time, and he'd say, "Look, you know, you ever want a job at Motec? Come over and put in an application. I'll put in a good word for you." Blah blah blah. So one day I went over to Motec and I knocked on the door and went in and filled out an application and saw Joe and talked to Jim, who later became my boss, and they were looking for somebody who could do tuning. That could take up some of the slack for George Clark, because George Clark was doing all the tuning of every vehicle in the North America that had a Motec on it. George Clark had his fingers on it, and he had literally worked himself to death. And they were looking for somebody that could come in and play second fiddle to George and pick up some of the slack for him. And I told him, "Man, I'm your guy, and that's what I want to do. And I don't have any experience doing it, but I have the desire." And
so
yeah.
You said that you should have ran in the opposite direction from the auto industry so you could actually make some money. Why do you think that people in the industry have such a hard time making money? Why do you think the industry struggles with that?
Because I think everybody, just like me, doesn't come at it from a business perspective. They come at it from the perspective of, I want to do this and I want to make something work. It's the same struggle I have. If I was always thinking about money, I would make a lot of money. But I'm always thinking about, how can I do this better? How can I tune this better? How can I? And the money comes with it. It's not hard to make money, but it's hard to make big retire at 45 years old money, because you're always focused on the task instead of making money. If you went to a school of business first and then said, okay, now I have really good business skills, I'm going to go apply these to the automotive industry, you'd probably do great. But I think everybody comes at it from the sort of, I used to work on my street car, now I want to work on race cars, and you're so focused on trying to make the race car work, you can't think about the business part of it.
Right.
I mean, I struggle with that all the time, and that's definitely, you know, that's definitely a shortcoming that I have. I'm way better
and it's hard to attract
than I am at business.
Right. It's really hard to attract really high-level guys and guys that have high-level educations with only passion and not being able to make, you know, the six figures that a lot of those guys are accustomed to making at a government job where they can work for 6 hours a day.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different story.
We won't go down that path. So every one of us $500 tuners wants to know what it's like at the highest level of tuning. So we have something to aspire to, you know? Like, we want to know how much you charge for tuning. Like, you're working with world-class teams. So can you shed some light on that for us?
Yeah, look, you know, when I worked at Motec, they charged $500 a day to go tune a car. And the thing of it is, you have to fucking know a lot more than $500 for one day to tune a car. Now, I still, right now, only charge $1,000 a day. But when I quit working at Motec, I immediately raised my price to $600 a day. People would pay it, no problem. So I immediately raised it to $800. Motec changed theirs to $600, then to $800. I moved mine to $1,000. And I haven't really gotten away from that in the States. When I do tuning in other countries, I charge $1,500 a day because I'm not able to come home and be with my family. But
including travel time?
Yeah, this is the day. No, this is just expenses and everything are on the side. This is just raw. You want me on site, it's $1,000 a day plus expenses, $500 for travel days. So you're paying airfare, hotel, rental car, whatever it is, $500 on Monday for me to fly there. On site, $1,000 Tuesday, $1,000 Wednesday, and fly home Thursday for $500. So the deal, this is how remote tuning got started. Because, you know, for me to fly to, say, I don't know, pick somewhere. How about Chicago? For me to fly to Chicago, I leave Monday. That's $500 for me. $1,000 for Tuesday and Wednesday. $500 for Thursday. That's $3,000 for me. But guess what? It's about another $2,000 for the customer because they get to pay airfare, hotel, rental car, all this other shit. And everybody else is making double the money on me, and I don't think that's cool. So I decided to start doing remote tuning in 2006. Partially because of that. I set my price at $250 an hour because I figured, you know what, if I get online for 4 hours the actual amount of time that I'm spending to tune your car is probably 4 hours of the day, because the rest of the time we're waiting for shit to cool off, fix whatever oil leaks you have, you know, that kind of stuff. So in 4 hours, I can get done what you would pay me to do in a day. That pays me the same amount, but by the way, I get to go work on something else in the next 4 hours, or I can just go home and be with my family. And we haven't now spent a bunch of money with the airline, the rental car company, and the hotel company to make them extra money off the top of my back doing the job for you. So
plus you're gone.
Plus I'm gone, you know. So remote tuning was something that a friend of mine that did he did IT work, and he was based in Southern California, and he was one day telling me about how he was logging into these servers in Texas, and he's using this software program that's easy to install, and it installs on the fly, and it was go to my PC. And so he's telling me about it, and then in my mind, I'm listening to him, but I'm thinking, fuck, what would stop me from logging into a computer hooked to a car somewhere and doing? If I can do everything on the laptop that I could do on my laptop, then I basically tune a car. So I said something to my dad. He's like, that's fucking smart. So I had this small block that I built to go try to learn how to tune back when I first started at Motec. The funny part of it is that by the time I got to the point where I ran that thing on the dyno, I'd already been tuning shit for 2 or 3 years and really didn't use it to learn how to tune, but I've used it several times to try other things. So anyway, one time we went and stuck. I have a couple of guys that I've worked that have known me since I'm a little kid that have a dyno shop, and so they give me some time on the dyno. I bolt my small block on the dyno and go over there and run the thing with the ECU. This is probably early 2006. With the ECU on the laptop, I tune the engine so it runs, no problem. Then I go to the neighbor's shop next door, and at that time there was no high speed. We had dial-up. So we had dial-up on the computer on the dyno. I went to the shop next door to their office and got on another laptop, dial-up, and connected through Go to My PC to the one that was on the dyno next door, and just made sure I could at least see it work and how fast it was, and it was okay. So then I said, all right, went back next door, wiped the entire file out, and tuned the thing from scratch from the office next door. And it was, I even came up with a method to get the guy running the dyno to go to the next operating site. So what I'd do is go stick the cell on the fuel table at, say, 2,000 RPM, and that would tell him, okay, I want to run it at 2,000. He'd get the engine to 2,000 RPM, and then I'd go stick it at the 20% throttle site. He'd open to 20, I'd adjust the table, then I'd go to 30, and he'd just follow me around, and we mapped the whole entire engine that way. And it was like, okay, this is a viable option. This is something that could really work. And we just did it over dial-up, and it still worked. So anything faster than this will be, you know, icing on the cake. And I had some clients in Chicago that did Viper stuff. And I used to go out there when I worked at Motec, and I always felt bad because I would go out there for 2 or 3 days, and it would be 2 or 3 days worth of stupid shit. And then the last 3 hours before I need to go to the airport, finally everything's sorted out, and I'm trying to tune the thing in 3 hours and not miss my plane. And so these guys wanted me to come out and tune some of these Vipers, and I basically I held their feet to the fire because I couldn't get anybody to want to bite on this concept of them paying me to not be there to tune the car. Because in 2006, no one thought that
they
weren't ready for it.
People aren't buying it.
And I get that, but so I basically told them, look, I'm not coming. Either you're going to do this remotely or I'm not doing it at all. So they reluctantly set up a remote tuning session, and we did it, and it worked brilliantly. And they said from then on, we only ever wanted, this is bitching, because every time we would have a problem, oh, fuck, we just ran out of fuel pressure. Ah, shit, the fuel pump died. We got to get a new one to put it in. Okay, no problem. Stop the clock. Call me tomorrow or call me in 3 hours when you've got the thing back running again, and we'll get started. Meanwhile, they're not paying for me to sit there with my twiddling my thumbs while they fix the fuel pump with the thing on the dyno, right? So it's brilliant for them. It's brilliant for me because now I can work on something else. And, you know, despite the shortcomings that everyone thinks you would have from not being in front of the car, I actually find for myself, now part of what makes this work is that I have a Motec that lets me look at everything and I can log everything. So I don't have to base half of my decisions on what I feel or smell or think. I can just look right at the data. But for me, honestly, I think I can do a better job remotely in some cases than I can when I'm on site. Because when you're on site, you have the pressure of the owner looking at you. You have 3 other guys that are standing around, dyno guys and helper guys, and they all think they heard or saw something different than what you did. You're trying to decipher what you thought you felt, saw, smelled, heard, whatever, versus the data. When I'm sitting in my office, I have no outside influences. I'm looking strictly at the data on the screen, and it's a lot easier to look at the data and make a decision without trying to, let's say, disarm a whole bunch of extra ideas about what it might have been.
You're able to remain entirely objective.
Exactly, and you look only at the graphs and go, and then the other thing is, when you're at the car, right, and you say, fuck, the thing doesn't make boost, I'll bet you something's wrong with the wastegate, but by the way, it's on a Viper, and that's underneath the car, and they're going to have to unstrap it from the dyno and lift it up, and the guy's going to burn his fucking arm trying to look down there and see if... So let me just see if I can find some other reason why it doesn't have boost, even though that's really what's wrong. You feel bad about the fact that you're going to have to ask them to go do this, but when I'm sitting 2,000 miles away in an office, and I look at it, I go, fuck you, go fix the wastegate. Something's wrong with it. I don't give a shit if it's hot. Let it sit for 3 hours. I don't care, but that's what's wrong. And, you know, I mean, I can't tell you how many times sitting several thousand miles away from a car, I'm able to look at squiggly lines on a screen and tell somebody something as obvious as that. Hey, something's up with a wastegate. Go check it out. Oh, fuck, yeah, it's laying on the ground. Shit, okay, let's bolt it back on. I couldn't have done all the stuff that I did in Bahrain for several years without remote tuning because there was just – it just wouldn't be possible for me to fly back and forth to Bahrain that many times. But I specifically remember an incident one time where they went to run the car down the racetrack, and the thing was just completely fine, and then they made one run, and it's missing, and it's doing all this stupid shit, and it won't run right, and whatever. And so I get online, and I pull the data out of it, and I'm looking, and I can't find anything wrong with it. You know, the pulse width's the same as it's been, boost's the same as it's been, timing's the same, everything's the same, except the cam position signal is not in the same spot it normally is. So I'm thinking, what the fuck happened here? So I go, hey, look at the fucking intake cam. Is there any way that the bolts came loose and that thing backed itself up? And then they go, oh, yeah, we can see where it smeared the fucking aluminum or the bolts in order to back the cam timing up. So it's like, all right, well, put that back where it was, and I think your problem's solved. So it is. So, I mean, look, on a Supra, the first thing you see when you open the engine bay is the freaking cam gears hanging out in front of your face. And I'm 8,000 miles away looking at a laptop going, hey, turn around and look at the cam gear. They go, yep, it moved. So that's an obvious case, and there's just a couple examples. But, I mean, it's pretty amazing the amount of stuff that you can figure out looking at the data that standing right in front of it you don't even think of, you know?
And without the pressure of people looking at you.
That's the key. I can just look at it like I don't care that the guy wants to go run his car again. I'm just looking at what I've got on the screen and trying to decide what's going on from there.
So you talked about the pressure of the owner of the car looking at you while you're tuning and that affecting your objectivity because you're trying to tune the car and get him to the track tomorrow. Yeah. But if you're at your office, you don't really have to deal with that pressure, and that makes it better.
For me, it does. It does. I mean, maybe not everybody can do it. I mean, I don't think I could do it if I didn't have – it doesn't have to be a Motec, but it would certainly have to be something that gives me the access to all of the information like a Motec does. I mean, look, I've had same thing. Guys in Bahrain, another customer in Bahrain takes it to Econ Racing to get their car working. They bought a wiring harness from someone in the States, and we have no documentation. So me and Hyder's the team manager over there at Econ Racing in Bahrain, and I've worked with Hyder since the first day I went over there. Anyway, they bring this car in. They've got a harness that's all set up. We have no idea where the wires go. We have no documentation for the harness. We have no file in the ECU. It's blank. So we have to basically start from scratch. And I have to tell Hyder, okay, go plug the TPS in and let me watch the inputs, raw voltage values on the inputs to figure out where they've wired the TPS. Okay, that's on AV2, fine. Go plug the map sensor in. That's AV3. Look at the map sensor. What's the scale? What's the range? Okay, fine, plug that in. I mean, literally spent 12 hours over a course of 3 days rebuilding a config from scratch on a car we never touched, reverse engineering the wiring loom that they built to try to get them up and going. And we did it. I don't know that I could have done it with anybody else. I mean, because it does take someone on the other end understanding that they're your eyes and your hands, and they really have to do what you what you ask them to do to be able to help you on the far end. But Hyder was able to do it, and I'll tell you right off the bat, like this other team had contacted me about building them a loom for the car, and I told them how much it was, and they didn't like my price. So they went and had somebody else build them a loom, and at the end of the day, they paid me probably 4 times what they would have paid me to build them a loom in the first place, to diagnose and set it up and change it online. So at the end of the day, I guess, I can't complain too much. I wouldn't have made that kind of money selling them in the first place. But it's just an example of what you can actually achieve remotely. It's pretty remarkable.
So it seems like such a no-brainer, but it's kind of difficult when you're doing a remote tune because you can't feel it. You can't hear it. So you really are relying on the dyno operators to tell you, hey, this is sounding a little funky. We need to address this. But I guess you're saying if you're looking at all of the data, a sound is just I guess what you pick up on from something going wrong.
Look,
so
you can hear when one sounds right. You can feel when one sounds right. But you have to be pretty fucking experienced to be able to be right about that. I can count. I'll lose count. I don't have enough fingers to count all the times I've heard somebody at the racetrack or on the dyno tell me how something sounded this way. It sounds rich. Look, I've been tuning cars since I was fucking 14, and I can't tell you when one sounds rich or sounds lean. I mean, way off one end or the other, you can tell that something's wrong, but there's no fucking way you can tell me within a few air-fuel ratios of which is right and which is wrong. Or, it sounds like an ignition miss. It sounds like it's a fuel miss. It sounds like it's how about fuck that? Let's just get the data and see what it really is. Or we can guess for the rest of the day.
That's what I'm talking about. So I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about a little bit more about when somebody's looking at you versus being in your office and being able to stay objective. So how do you deal with the devil on your shoulder telling you that something can't be done? Do you doubt yourself and ever second guess your decisions?
Yeah, all the time. My biggest mistake is, one of them. I have many, but one of my big mistakes is I'll look at something and in a second and a half. I mean, I have a gut feeling something has a problem. It has a whatever it is. It needs a change to something. I know the answer, and I'll say it in the first 1 minute that I look at it, and then I will say, well, it can't be that. That's too easy, and then I'll spend an hour trying to prove that my knee-jerk reaction was wrong. And at the end of the hour, or 4 hours, I eventually come full circle back to, that's what was really wrong with it. I mean, it's happened over and over and over, and I still don't entirely trust my first, you have this preconceived notion or whatever it is, and you figure this is what it's going to be, but fuck, it doesn't make sense. How could it be? All this other shit has to be, you go through all of it and eventually come back to the first thing, and you go, I probably should have just started with that. It would have saved some time, but what the hell, they're paying me by the hour, so who cares?
So do you try to react to your gut? Do you find that your gut is usually right? A lot of people always say, hey, trust your gut instinct. Do you think that's the real deal?
I think it works in some cases, but it doesn't work every time, and that's what stops me from just, taking the first shot off the belt at whatever it is. I'm always trying to prove that that's really what's wrong. And in some cases, I spend a bunch of time to prove that I was right in the first place. But there's times where I figure, it was my first, knee jerk, but I was wrong. I wouldn't say you want to make a policy of just going with what your first reaction is. But it's uncanny how often that I end up being right in the first place. I just don't believe it at the time.
So Econu Racing is one of your top clients, and you guys just did something fucking unreal last week. So before we get into that and talk about the things that you've done, you've already told us a lot of things that you've done that have been really successful. Can you give us an example of the worst experience that you've had since you've become a professional tuner? Take us to that point, some point when you really thought your career was in jeopardy or you really made a bad life choice. What's the worst experience?
You're never really, at least I'm not, you're never coming at it from the perspective of, I wonder if this is a safe thing for me to do for the guy that's sitting in that car. But I can tell you this, as soon as that car starts to crash, the fucking only thing on your mind is, man, there's a human being sitting in that thing. And not only is it a human being, it's my buddy. And, watching that car go over the fence, a week and a half ago in Bahrain, there was a period of time, and I don't really know what that period of time was. It seemed like a long time. It might have only been 5 minutes, but I couldn't move. I mean, I couldn't leave the starting line. I couldn't go down there. I figured I wouldn't be worth anything going down there anyway. The safety crew at the track was on their way to try and help them. But, me and Josh Ledford stood on the starting line just kind of, I can't even hardly describe the feeling, but I can tell you that I had packed my bags in my mind, and I was on an airplane back, and I wasn't going to work on another fucking race car because I was sure we had killed Colin. And of course, then they came back and said, look, he's okay. And then I sort of came to my senses and, manned up a little bit and figured no. But it's something that it's never happened to me. But, you feel at least some sense. It's a race car. Everybody knows it's a race car. It's risky. But you certainly feel some sort of responsibility when something like that happens. And the way I took it and tried to turn it into a positive was that, you know what, I am somewhat responsible, and it's my responsibility to figure out a way to stop that from ever happening to another car that I'm working on. And what sucks is I had the technology on that car. I had a pitch rate sensor in the back of the car that we were using to try and control the height of the front wheels off the ground, but I never considered using it for a catastrophic failure like that. And looking at the data after that run, it would have been so easy to implement a strategy where the pitch angle starts to get crazy at that point in the run and just kill the power to the engine and deploy the parachute, because I have all the technology and capability to do it with the M1. So I will absolutely implement that from now on, and I also said that I would share with any other manufacturer the method that I'm going to use to do it, because I believe that it's imperative for us to, look, if we don't do something about it, we're going to end up killing our clientele. So that doesn't make business sense, does it?
Yeah. That crash was so hairy. I watched it this morning, and I had, the hair on my arm standing up, because that looks like somebody is not alive.
Yeah, that's what I thought. And it just defied logic when the car went vertical in the air and it didn't come back down right away. It was, my brain seized. I had I don't know. I couldn't process the fact that car was in the air and it wasn't coming back down. And then when it hit the wall and went over the fence, it was like, well, I don't know what that was. I don't know. After it went over the fence, I don't really remember anything much for a few minutes. But I do remember thinking, that's it, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore, and I'm over it. And then, like I said, I sort of, once we knew it was okay, I gathered my wits and said, all right, fuck, it's a race car. Let's go. Let's move on. So we did. But I'm definitely going to implement some safety measures in that car. And the other thing that there was one other time where I was working with some clients in 2012 that were running a car at Bonneville, and I had worked with them most of the year, and I got another deal with another race team to go work on a sports car where they wanted to do a turbo setup and run in SCCA runoffs, and that was a much bigger and more enticing project. And unfortunately, I couldn't stay focused on both projects like I would like to have been. And I set up the controls for this Bonneville car, used nitrous, and I had set all this stuff up in my shop before they went to Bonneville and tested it all on the bench. And I was up in Canada testing while they were at Bonneville making their first run, and these guys are in their early 70s and late 60s, and I think there's generically a big push at Bonneville for all of those guys that have been out there doing this forever, that, hey, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be around, and I want to take some of my my experience, and I want to take some of my money and find somebody who can help me achieve this goal before I'm not around to achieve it anymore. So,
and you're that guy.
Well, I'm that guy, and those guys happen to be those kind of guys. So anyway, you work with these guys, and you can't hardly help but almost be inspired by their desire and their get up and go, and I hope I have that much get up and go when I'm their age. But the point is, they're relying on me to help them reach their goal, just like everybody is. And they go out there to run the car, and they call me back and they go, look, we burned it up. Something happened. It caught fire, and they don't know what they're looking at. They're relying strictly on me. So I'm like, what the fuck? That shouldn't have happened. So I talked them through how to send me the data. Again, I'm at this test in Canada, and I get the data out and I look at it, and I realize where I made my mistake. I tested the nitrous control in my shop with solenoids that I had, not the solenoids from the car. And I out-tricked myself by trying. I knew that they were old and they wouldn't be used to using electronics, and they would probably fucking leave the nitrous bottle turned off and go to make a pass, and it would be too rich and not run. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll watch the current going to the solenoids, and I'll activate the fuel enrichment based on the current that goes to that solenoid. So when the current is above X amount, the solenoid must be on, turn on the enrichment and retard.
Their solenoids drew less current and never activated the fuel enrichment.
And like, how fucking stupid do I have to be to try and make that? I mean, I would never try to make that work normally, but I was trying to be tricky, out-tricked myself completely. So when I looked at the data, I could see the nitrous enrichment wasn't on, obviously, and then I pretty quickly worked out why. And I'm like, what the fuck do I do now? So I called them, and I said, listen, this is my fault. I've tuned a lot of cars. A lot of shit's broken before. I've never really felt like it was my fault, because typically I can see the handwriting on the wall when something's going bad, and you tell them, listen, you should stop because this thing doesn't have enough oil pressure. No, fuck, let's just make one more dyno pull. We're almost done. Yeah, and then it flings everything out on the floor. And it's like, look, I told you that the thing was going to break. But this was a different deal, man. This was me saying, yeah, go ahead, everything's cool, and I set it all up. But really the deal was, I didn't pay enough attention because I was busy. I had my focus taken away working on this other thing. And so bottom line is I screwed up. So I told him, listen, this is my screw up. I will fix all the electronics. Just send them to me. I'll fix all the wiring and whatever's melted, any sensors you need. And then just let me know what it costs for the engine. They said, okay, cool. Now, I've never said that to any customer ever. And I probably won't ever say it again. But you know what happened? They called me in about 3 minutes and said, look, we just had a team meeting. You could have bullshitted us. We'd have had no fucking idea. We don't know what we're looking at. You could have told us anything, and we'd have believed you because we have no way to argue. But the fact that you admitted that you made a mistake and were willing to take care of it, we will never have anyone working on our car except you. And don't worry about what it costs to fix the engine. We're going to cover that. That's part of racing. And just fix our wiring stuff up, and let's go set a record next year.
Wow.
So,
I mean, that's the way to handle that situation. And how many shysters are in the industry ruining it for everybody with kind of the I'm not going to take responsibility thing. And at the end of the day, the recurring theme in everybody that's successful that I interview is they fucking own it.
Yeah. Look, doing this job, there's a whole lot of credit that goes your way sometimes when you don't deserve all of it. And there's also a whole lot of shit that gets flung your way, and sometimes you don't deserve that. So you learn to take the good with the bad, and you don't argue. I mean, it used to be I would argue, like, look, no, I didn't have nothing to do with that. But now it's just like, look, if you think I did that, then fuck it, I'm not going to argue that I didn't. But really, it's not that hard to just treat people how you want to be treated. That's the whole key with the guys in the Middle East. What happens with those guys a lot is people figure out how much money there is behind them, and then they go for the throat. They figure, fuck, I'm going to get rich on the next project. I've been working with Econo Racing since 2000. This is my 8th year. And I can guarantee you that if I decided on the first year that I was going to try and make all the money for the rest of my life in that first year, I would not be working for them still. And I've made money with those guys since 2007, 8 years now. And I don't know, it could all end tomorrow, and that's fine. But part of it I have to think is the fact that I treat them right. I told them up front, look, if you're going to buy shit from me, I'm going to mark it up. I'm in business. I'm not here to do it for free. And you could probably get it cheaper if you want to call freaking Summit and Jegs and everybody in the world on your own. That's fine. But if you want me to do it, you're going to pay me for it, and I'm going to charge you more. But I let them know that up front. I didn't send them a bill after the stuff showed up that was 10 times bigger than they thought.
Right. Yeah. And that takes a pair, because that's difficult to do. Because, on some level, it's hard to say, look, I know you can get it cheaper, but this is what I charge. But the thing that you got to realize is that other people, like our listeners, need to realize is like, you're providing a service. So it's not just the fact that you provide the part. You didn't just give them the part, but you're like, this is the part that you need. Here's why you need it. I'm going to implement this part in your race car.
That everything I do is entirely a service business. I mean, the parts just happen to be a means to an end. I'm not a parts warehouse. I'm not a Summit. But you're never going to get somebody at Summit that's going to be able to do what I can do with this stuff and point you in the right direction. And I'm not having a go at Summit. I'm just saying that this is a service business. It's not a commodity. Your goal is to try and get the money out of that guy's wallet and have him be happy about giving it to you. That's your job.
So that everybody involved in the transaction is happy. You're not trying to convince them to give you their money. You're trying to provide a service that's worth more than whatever's in their wallet, right? Like that dollar.
It's not a trick. It's not how can I bullshit them into giving my money and let them think that I'm happy about it. It's a legitimate. I got to feel good about the money I'm taking from you, and you have to feel good about the fact that you're giving me that money because you feel like I provided you something that was worth it. When you go to the restaurant, and you want to tip the waiter that gives you exceptional service, it's the same fucking exact concept. You feel good when, at least for me, when somebody does it. It actually kind of sucks because our whole society seems to have tipped to the left a little bit about we have to give everybody a tip, and so that's just sort of standard. But when I have somebody that goes out of their way and I feel like they've done a really good job for me, I have no trouble giving them a way bigger tip than I would normally give anybody, just because it's rare. It shouldn't be rare. It shouldn't be, but it is. And I appreciate someone who's willing to work hard because I'm willing to work hard. I don't expect somebody to give me something for nothing. It would be nice if they did, and I guess I wouldn't argue if they wanted to give me some big enough something for nothing. But no, at the end of the day, you got to work. Nobody gets to where you are by being handed the keys. You got to get your ass out of bed and get to work. People ask me all the time. I get requests on Facebook and email, and just pick a method. But they all want to know, look, I want to tune cars and I want to do what you do. So what do I need to do that? Like, look, you need to be me. You have to fucking have a Briggs & Stratton when you're 14 and fuck around with an electronic fuel injection and a blower and nitro, and you have to go work for an automotive company and a tech support hotline for 5 or 6 years. And that was,
in other words, you're not going to do it this year. You're going to do it 20 years from now.
You're not going to have the experience that I've had without doing it yourself. And you're not going to go to school for it. And going to school is great, but you can't read out of a book and develop experience. That doesn't mean that I don't read out of books. I read books all the time, and I'm so dumb that I have to read them over and over and over again. But you know what? Every time I go back through Ricardo again, or every time I go back through, one of the other advanced engine controls like Taylor book again, I always pick up something that I didn't pick up before. And I love reading old NACA paperwork from between World War I and World War II. You know what's bitching about that? They don't just simply fill it with formulas that I'm not educated enough to follow those formulas. I need somebody to tell me the story. I can understand the story, and if you let me see it, I can really understand it. If you tell me how to calculate it, I'm going to screw it up. Now, I might work out how to calculate it later, but I have to know the story first.
Context.
Yeah, so, anyway.
So you work with world-class teams like eCanoe Racing, but do you try to do everything yourself, or are you comfortable working with other people? They always say do what you do best and hire the rest. How are you with that?
Look, I've realized that the handwriting's been on the wall here for several years, but I've reached a certain level, and I can't go further without having some employees in my business. As far as specifically working with some of those teams, the eCanoe team this year especially, there's so many cars. I'm basically in charge of 7 cars. That's 2 nitrous Pro Mod cars, 1 450 index dragster, the 10.5 Super that ran in the 5s, the stock chassis Super that ran 660, the FT86 or GT86 or whatever we're calling it this week. There's too many cars, too many different kinds of cars for me to be able to be the only guy running all of those. So what we did was we took a sort of a tiered approach where I'm sort of generically, let's say, the technical guy in charge of all of those cars, but I have car chiefs like Josh Ledford on the Lexus and Eric Luzinski working on the Outlaw 10.5 car, where they can basically run that car, and I only need to show up and look at the data, make small changes, and answer questions if they need me to answer them. But they can kind of run those cars, and that frees me up to be able to work on the other cars and focus on them a little bit more. So I guess I'm sort of being trained on how to be able to swallow the pill of letting someone else have their hands on something that I'm putting my name on.
And that's a struggle that you've had to work with, because normally I guess when you were coming up, you were the guy that was hands-on and also the tuner.
Yeah, and I'm not really good at being able to. I just don't trust anybody except myself, which is a flaw, I guess.
Yeah.
But something I need to get over to move forward.
Well, this so far is blowing my mind, and I just got a few more things, and then I'll let you go. I know that you're super busy.
No, look.
So I appreciate you taking all the time.
It's $250. So as long as your credit card is good, we can keep talking all you want.
Sounds good. So, Shane, tell us about a game-changing product that you've seen in the last year, and try not to be a sellout here. What makes it a game changer?
Well, if you want me to not be a sellout, then I won't mention the fuel pump controller from ID. Oh shit! I just mentioned it. Honestly, I guess I haven't had my finger on the pulse of the industry very much. But when I was at PRI, out of the corner of my eye, I did see that there was a product that they were using inside of a fuel cell that seemed to be able to draw fuel out of. It looked almost like thin air. It's some sort of gel mat technology, and I don't really know a whole lot about it. I didn't stop to look at it. I saw it on the way to a meeting. I saw a video of it later, but it looks to me like something that could be really, really useful in every kind of application where you're trying to deliver fuel from some location and transfer it to some other location in the vehicle. So I think that may be a game changer. Maybe not. Maybe it's a sales gimmick. I don't know. I don't know enough about it. But if it works the way it looked like it worked, I think that'd be huge.
That's the second time that Holley's Hydromats come up. So I'm going to have to get somebody at Holley to, or maybe I get a third party to really test it so I don't get the marketing side. But it definitely has potential because two people, yourself and Paul, have both been like attracted to that concept.
I don't really know what it is, but I do know that made me go, what the fuck is that?
Right.
So I don't know a whole lot about the technology. I haven't looked at it. I've been too busy working on other stuff, but that looks to me like something that could be extremely useful.
What do you think about using a high-speed pressure transducer in the crankcase, like as an alternative to knock sensing? Do you think that's something that could hold any water?
I mean, I've had crankcase pressure sensors on some of the Porsche stuff that we ran in IMSA and Grand Am, and the key was high speed. We're just using a standard pressure transducer, and potentially we weren't looking at it fast enough. But the bottom line was, by the time the crankcase pressure was coming up, it was already fucked. So that technology may be useful. The way I've seen it implemented so far, I don't know that it is.
And wouldn't that just be a sample rate situation?
Well,
so you'd have to pair the high-speed pressure transducer with an equally capable ECU. But it seems to me that, you'd see a poof of pressure and you could call it knock.
Yeah, you might be able to see a poof of pressure, but that assumes that it can shove pressure past the rings. And the way the rings work is that the more pressure you put on them, the more they want to seal. So it's hard to say for sure if it would be valuable. What we saw in those cars was, the crankcase pressure would go up after it's already damaged the piston in the ring enough to leak past them and leak, cylinder pressure in the crankcase. So I'm not saying it's not possible. It might work. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting to think about.
Just kind of a concept. It came up at PRI actually when we were talking to somebody at the ID booth, and it's been rattling around in my brain ever since. I figured I had the opportunity, I would bounce it off you.
Yeah, if you were at the ID booth, your first clue is if their lips are moving, then they're fucking lying.
I'll put that in an email and send it to Paul and repeat. I'll automatically email it once a day.
Don't do that. Look, I found this great thing that I do. So Motec's got this new ECU that they're working with, and basically they'll allow you to buy a development kit that lets you write code for the ECU, which I've been toying around with. And I'm a tuner now. I'm not a code writer, but I've had to deal with Drake DeVore over at Motec East, who is basically in charge of that whole program in the United States. And so, I've had questions, and from time to time, he's able to answer it and he's able to not. But I found the greatest thing that I could do was call his voicemail one day, and on his voicemail I just left him a simple message. It was "fuck you," and then I hung up. And then every time I have a problem and he won't answer a question, I just send him a text and says, "call your voicemail." So you could do the same thing with Paul,
That's a done deal. I'm on it. So since you're flying all over the world, how do you keep your schedule in order? Things like family events. For me, I love my wife like nobody's fucking business, but she's got her head buried in books for the next year and a half really, to become a physical therapist. So I've basically got like a free pass to work crazy hours. How much of a role does family responsibilities play in your tuning schedule?
Yeah, it didn't used to be big, but now I'm married 8 years, and now we have a little girl, and it's weighing on me heavily. I mean, look, I screw it up all the time. I have a client that wants me to go to Australia over, starting at the end of March through like the 6th or 7th of April, which I told him, yeah, no problem. And then last night I was telling my wife, and she's like, well, the 5th is Easter, so now I got to call the guy back and go, look, I got to come home because it's Easter on Sunday. The good news is in that case that those clients happen to be heavily family-oriented also. And so they'll say, yeah, okay, we get it. Let's change the schedule around. But it sucks. I forget shit like that all the time. And it's not really fair to either my client or my family, but I don't know. I'm too scatterbrained to be able to keep it straight. So it is what it is.
Do you use Google Calendar or anything to schedule your stuff, or are you a sticky notes kind of guy?
I try to use Google Calendar. I try to use Yahoo Mail Calendar. I try to use a calendar on my phone, and I can't find time to sync all of them, and I'm just too scattered to use it. So the reality of it is I just try to keep it in my head, and then I just forget it. So, yeah. I could clearly do better. I could clearly do better there. I mean, really, I could do better in a whole lot of ways. I just can't seem to find the time. I don't when I have some spare time, which isn't very often, but when I have some spare time, I don't think what can I do to improve my business? Instead, I'm thinking, man, let me get the ECU on the simulator, and let me get the an ejector hook to it, and let me hook the scope to it, and let me play around with something that I just did on a car, and let me see if I can figure out why it did it. Instead of what I should do is learn how to have a piece of software to straighten out my scheduling. I don't think that way. That goes back to that whole thing we were talking about earlier with coming at it from a business perspective versus the perspective I'm coming at it from, where I don't think business first. I think, how do I make this better first, or how do I improve my game first? And yeah, that's why I'm not. That's why you're able to get a hold of me, and I'm not on an island somewhere sipping Mai Tais all day long.
Sweet. Well, it worked out well for everybody then. So everybody's got a favorite tool. I really love my Picoscope. What's your favorite shop tool? I'm hoping it's something I've never heard of.
Yeah, I would say my Picoscope would be my favorite.
Yeah, that thing's incredible.
Yeah, that thing's. I mean, any scope is cool, but that thing is exceptionally bitchin' just because of. And the key is to figure out a way to use it the way it's not supposed to be used. I mean, it's a scope, but it's a ridiculously good data logger. It's an awesome 4-channel data logger. You can go put something on an engine, make an entire dyno pull, and pull the data from the whole dyno run and look at it. So even if you aren't looking at the obvious thing like the crank sensor or something, you could be looking at something like, I don't know, you could be looking at the map sensor signal at a real high speed and watching what the pulsation in the intake manifold looks like over an entire dyno pull and have it referenced to crank position because you've got the crank sensor also. So I love it. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, that thing's rad.
It's the best money I think I would say that I've probably ever spent on a tool.
Yeah. You have the high-speed, I'm sure you have all the bells and whistles, the high-speed pressure transducer, whatever. What else is there?
I've got a bunch of that stuff, but I just end up not ever using it. The simple thing, so I got the automotive kit. But the biggest thing I have is an adapter to an ECU, so that I have like a breakout harness, so I can just go hook it to any signal I want easily, and just move stuff around. And I just think it's the coolest thing in the world.
So we had some internet issues, and the last 3 minutes of the interview got cut off, so that's where we got to stop. Sorry to break everybody's heart. So to find out more about Shane T and what he's working on currently, check him out on Facebook at Tuned by Shane T. and tunedbyshanet.com. We also have more information at doitforaliving.net. Until next time, thanks and good luck.
Thanks for listening to Do It for a Living. You can find out more about this guest, this show, and even details about what we just talked about at our website, doitforaliving.net.
check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/doitforaliving and tell us who you want to hear from. And most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Click subscribe. Do it now. Seriously. I'll wait while you grab your phone. Open up the podcast app, tap the subscribe button. When you